What's going on, everyone? The Sony A7R5 has just been announced, and I've been lucky enough to have had this camera for about a week or so. Let's talk about it. Okay, so first things first, Sony is not paying me to say anything or to have any certain type of opinion. They did not get to see this video prior to release and have no say in what I talk about. And as of recording this video, I've actually already sent the camera back, so all's good. With that said, I was able to use this camera on a pretty wide range of jobs. I photographed a wedding, a baseball game, mountain biking, a studio portrait session, and even a newborn shoot, which I almost never photograph, but that's just kind of how the cards fell whenever I had the camera in my hands. Now, before we get too deep into things, I want to give you a brief overview of what this camera is, but I'm going to save the main standout feature towards the end of the video. But to give you a hint, it has to do with artificial intelligence, which I know is sort of a buzzword these days, but the feature is pretty dang awesome, so you want to stick around for that. So at the heart, this camera is actually rocking the same 61 megapixel full-frame sensor that you can find on the A7R4. But the key here is that they have added the Bion's XR image processing engine, which wasn't released at the time the A7R4 was launched. The addition of this new processor gives the A7R5 8 times more processing power when compared to the A7R4. They have also implemented a completely new and updated 5-axis in-body image stabilization. With this new update, you can achieve up to 8 stops of compensation. And while I didn't really test this feature to its full potential, it's my understanding that this 8 stops of range is with the body only. So don't get that confused with some other manufacturers' claims, because there are times where people will state the compensation with the body and stabilized lens combined. So if you use a lens with built-in optical stabilization on the A7R5, you can expect to see much greater results. In terms of image quality, this camera has things like 15 stops of dynamic range, selectable RAW sizes from small, medium, and large, as well as lossless RAW and compressed RAW file types. It also has the ability to do focus bracketing of up to 299 images. There's also a pixel shift multi-shooting mode where the camera will take 16 images in order to create a single 240.8 megapixel composite. And although this feature has been available in past cameras, the compositing is now updated and will adjust for fine scene movement, which will help with ghosting when the scene has things like trees and grass blowing in the wind. Sony has also updated its flash system, adding a new precise and versatile external flash control. So with PTTL selected, the camera will have the ability to adjust flash output, white balance, and exposure for each frame, even when shooting at the maximum 10 frames per second. This feature is great for situations when you are following a subject from indoors to outdoors and need the camera to quickly adjust to the variable conditions mid-shooting. The caveat here is that this will only work when paired with a Sony flash, something like the FM60, and this will not work with an aftermarket flash like the Godox V1. Now, in terms of the body itself, this camera is pretty similar to the Sony A7 IV with its relocated movie record button, as well as the dial collar for changing between photo, video, and S&Q. The Sony A7 V also has the same blank top on the left side of the camera, which to me is sort of wasted real estate. I would have preferred if they went with the Sony A9 or A1 setup here. The added left-sided dial just gives more options and can free up some custom buttons for other uses. And they already have this design and in use on current models, so I'm not sure why they're not using it for this latest release. But one thing they did change is the rear LCD screen. Some people love the tilting screen that can be found on cameras like the Sony A9 and the Sony A1. Other people prefer the flip-out screen that can be found on the A7S3, I believe, and the A7 IV. With the new A7R5, you get both. A 4-axis multi-angle LCD monitor that gives you the best of both worlds. And in use, it's pretty wonderful. Though if you have never used a flip-out screen, it can take some getting used to, especially when paired with the tilting function. I kept running into this situation where I would use the tilt screen as I normally would, then realize I needed more flexibility, so I'd flip out the screen and have this awkward moment where the screen was flipped and tilted at the same time. I also don't have the muscle memory for the screen yet, so I kept putting the screen back down the wrong way and would have this brief moment of confusion as my screen was showing all black, only to quickly realize the screen was simply facing the camera instead of facing towards me. But I feel like these are just little hangups that will resolve themselves with use. From here, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the movie features, though I don't shoot video really, so bear with me. The Sony A7R V can shoot 8K 24 and 4K 60. If you shoot in Super 35 crop mode, you can shoot 4K oversampled 6.2K with a powerful active stabilization. There's also 14 stops of dynamic range, the beloved S-Cinetone, S-Log3, and 16-bit RAW output. It also has breathing compensation, AF assist, focus mapping, shockless white balance, and the unique Sony Sigma shaped graphite heatsink for 30 minutes of 8K recording. But again, I don't shoot video and don't have any basis for an opinion, but I hear these are good features. Now, finally, for the headline feature, the Sony A7R V has a next generation AI-based autofocus system. What does that mean exactly? Well, this camera has an advanced real-time tracking with 693 high-density phase detection autofocus points and can focus accurately in conditions as low as -4 EV. Where the AI comes in is with the advanced subject recognition. The A7R V can now reliably recognize and track humans, animals, birds, insects, planes, cars, and trains. It does this with a new AI processing unit that is dedicated to artificial intelligence processing, including deep learning. So for example, with humans, we are no longer limited to face and eye detection. The new AI processing unit now uses detailed information about the human skeletal form in order to track over 20 different human body points, and it can recognize humans and human movement, as well as differentiate between multiple subjects having different posture. It can use this information to calculate movement, location, and eye proximity. In use, I noticed that as my subject became obscured by things in the frame, the AF would move to another part of the subject's body, even when their entire head was no longer present in the frame. If I was focusing on someone facing away from me, the AF would lock onto their eye the instant they gave me even the slightest head turn. Like when someone starts to turn and you can't see their eye, but you can see that slight concave indent on their head where the eye socket starts to begin. The instant you even saw that, the autofocus will lock onto that curve. Now, I can't see a situation where I would want to, focus on the curve of an eye socket while looking at the back of someone's head. But what this does is give you confidence that the instant they turn around, the AF will instantly lock onto their eye because it's already detected where that eye is going to be. The new AI also allows you to focus and track on subjects that are wearing a mask or helmet, since it's no longer dependent on the presence of a face or eye. With this new update, you will also see a 60% increase in eye AF performance, and the new AI processing power has the ability to lock onto the surface of an eye. So now you have more images where the surface of the eye is in focus instead of that pesky eyelash. From here, the new AI adds the ability to track all animal types and not just cats and dogs. It has the ability to distinguish between head and body of an animal. So even if the animal is turned around, the system can recognize and track the animal's head while calculating movement, eye proximity, and location. Similarly, the camera can recognize and track the head and body of insects. As for cars, trains, and planes, the camera can recognize and track the leading edge of all three subject types. Lastly, the auto exposure and auto white balance get an improvement based on this AI processing as well. With the new advanced subject recognition, the camera can base white balance and exposure decisions off the head and face of the subject, even if the subject is turned away from the camera. Because again, the camera is no longer reliant on the presence of a face or eye. Now, before I end this video, I want to talk a little bit about some real life experiences with this new autofocus. When I photographed mountain bikers, the camera did very well tracking them while wearing helmets and glasses. It also did very well tracking the profile and backs of riders while traveling through trees, which is inherently pretty difficult. I also don't shoot a ton of insects, but at a recent wedding, I found a bush full of butterflies and decided to, give it a quick little go. And I found it pretty spot on. I also found that photographing butterflies in flight is pretty dang difficult, so I will continue photographing people instead. In terms of regular people with things like eyes and faces, I was pretty dang impressed. The camera autofocus point felt much more sticky on my subject, even when there were multiple people in the scene, as well as when people would walk in front of my subject. And for a creative portrait I did at a wedding, I was photographing through this hypercube, which is a box of transparent mirrors and LED lights. And the autofocus was easily able to lock onto the silhouette of my couple without getting confused by all the other things that were going on in between the subject and my camera. When it came to my studio session, I had my kids posed in front of a custom backdrop I had painted by a buddy of mine. It's called Jeremy Ellsworth Backdrops. And I had them lit with a GVM 600. I wanted a slight gradient in the color, so I had a blue gel taped across half of the softbox. It's a fairly simple setup, but as you can see, my son has some really long hair, which is always getting in his face. And the camera was super fast to find the visible eye and lock on. It was also super fast to switch between the left eye and the right eye whenever they would turn their head back and forth constantly. For the baseball images, as well as even kind of the mountain bike images, I felt like this camera was sort of a blessing and a curse. I loved the added resolution. The longest lens I had was the 70-200 GM Mark II, and it was really nice being able to go into that Super 35 crop mode and still have a good file size still. But coming from the Sony A9 and having used the A1 quite a bit, I found the 10 frames per second to be a little limiting. I had to concentrate more on timing my images, which is fine, and I can do that. I've gotten used to capturing precise moments with 20 frames per second, and it's just a little bit more tedious with a slower frame rate. And so I just didn't get as many hits as I normally would. All right, I think that gives you a pretty good look into what this camera can do, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comments, and also make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And with that, catch you on the next one.